then situation ethics. Please make sure your sheets are the right way around and that it says situations at the top. First slide is for the 3 approaches to moral thinking. You'll see at the top you have the 3 boxes, 1 for each. Legalistic is, and again that just needs summarising as best as possible. Legalistic just means following the law. It's exactly as it sounds. Laws accumulate to cover all eventualities. So basically that means is a law is established and then laws develop as new situations come about. So the law takes new situations into account and then develops more laws. So once murder was prohibited, so not allowed, this law then had to consider its ruling over other possibilities like self-defence, abortion, war. A legalistic or a legalist must constantly update, develop and add new laws to remain up to date. So when new things happen, like genetic engineering has only happened over the past 30, 40 years, it had to develop new laws to say that cloning is against the law, that stem cell is allowed by law, etc. Such fixed laws, as found within the Catholic Church or Protestant teachings as well, have problems when it comes to updating these laws. There is no 2nd, 3rd, 4th edition. So when you follow fixed laws, it is very, very hard to keep up to date. Hence why one of the problems with the church at the moment is things to do with homosexuality. Should it update its laws to allow homosexual marriage? How does it deal with homosexuality within the church, etc.? Fixed laws cause problems. The opposite of legalistic is antinomian. This is the opposite. Basically, a person following antinomianism doesn't apply any kind of law, rule, principle or system of ethics. Every moral decision is unique, following no patterns or preferences. Nietzsche and Sartre were fans of this approach. They believed that there are no rules to follow, only your own choices. Basically, you do whatever you want to do in that moment in time. Antinomianism sounds very much like anarchy. And that's probably what it would be if we all followed this. The middle ground between the two is situational. Moral actions depend on the situation. A situationist will enter a moral dilemma with rules and ethics based on community, tradition, family, conscience, whatever it is. However, they are always prepared to set aside these rules if love is best served doing so. So a situationist would approach a situation like abortion, for example, with the rule or the teaching of abortion is not right, you should not do it. They then look at the situation and see that it's a young girl that might have been raped, and they think actually the most loving thing to do is allow this person to have an abortion. So you come with rules. These could be personal, cultural rules, not just the law of the land, but then this might change based on if love is better served doing something else. A bit like weak rule utilitarianism if you want to. Loving people, not laws, therefore believes in the absolute rule of love that needs to be applied situationally. All you need is love. This is the absolute law that goes above all other laws. You do not need to focus on this slide in your exam. This is just a very quick in passing comment. This would be an introduction. Situation ethics is established as the middle ground between legalistic and antinomianism, which is the belief of following just the laws or doing what you please, whereas situation ethics focuses on applying rules to situations, and that rule is always love. So even if leaving other laws behind, love is the focus of a situation ethics approach. Something like that. So you could do it in passing. You don't have to focus big paragraphs on these ideas. All right, next slide. So the box underneath is for the inspirations, the book. This is the good book. So these are the inspirations. You have the people and the book that inspires situation ethics. So this is based on the book. So these 3 boxes are to do with the 3 key points. The first box is for the Bible. The second box is just for St. Paul. So I've separated the argument so you remember that there's 3 linked on this slide. The third is Joseph Fletcher. So you've got first box for just in the Bible paragraph from Mark, second box in the middle for just St. Paul, third part of the box is for Fletcher, the founder. So it's just to help you separate that there's 3 parts of the inspirations for this section. So the book. This is, of course, the Bible. The Bible are the New Testament specifically the teachings of Jesus that inspire situation ethics and agape. Jesus makes love central. Everything Jesus does, and if you remember going back to the person of Jesus topic, the focus of Jesus' actions is always the most loving thing to do. So this is the core of Christian New Testament teachings. When Jesus was asked to say which commandment, that's out of the 10, is first, don't forget they always tried to trick Jesus, they always tried to catch him out. Jesus answered, the first is hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. You shall love your God with all of your heart. The second is this, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. That is a fabulous quote. I am not expecting you to remember it all or even having to write it all down. But what you have to remember is this. When Jesus was put on the spot about the commandments, what he is saying there is that you should love your God with everything you have. And then you should love your neighbour as yourself, which is linked with the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. Middle box is for St. Paul. Don't forget St. Paul, Saul, fish scales, that's Saul, that's St. Paul. He said, and now faith, hope and love abide, and the greatest of these is love, found in 1 Corinthians. Even if you just write down, and the greatest of these is love, fantastic place to start a situation ethics essay. St. Paul, an inspiration for situation ethics, says in 1 Corinthians that the greatest of these is love. This established the foundations for Joseph Fletcher's approach to agape within situation ethics. Boom, done. It's a good start to an essay. Very, very simple, very effective. You don't have to remember long quotes. It's how you use them that makes it effective. Third box is for Joseph Fletcher, 1905 to 1991. Recognise that he's quite recent. He's not as old as some of the people that we cover. He's also lived through both world wars. Joseph Fletcher applies these Christian origins of agape love in his moral system. He roots it in the New Testament. He looks to the New Testament actions of Jesus who set aside laws or even broke rules for the good of the people and love. For Fletcher, there he is, for Fletcher, situation ethics is a Christian ethic that should focus on flexible message of forgiving grace founded on, of course, love, rather than rigid rules, laws and commandments. The churches obviously didn't agree with him. He's saying, forget the divine law, forget the Bible, all of it, forget the scripture, forget the priest and the bishops and the pope's teachings, just focus on love. That's not going to go down that well. A lot of Jesus' actions show that he focused more on the people. So even who his disciples were, even the people that he helped, like the leper, the bleeding lady, all of these people were seen as outcasts within society. Jesus, even Jesus being close to women, that was unheard of. Men stayed with men, women stayed with women. Even having Mary Magdalene being close to his own mother and things like that, people like that, showed that Jesus was more about love than just following society's expectations. Use examples to back up your points. All right. Box underneath, the arrows are coming from Joseph Fletcher because this is Joseph Fletcher now continued. These are the inspirations of situation ethics, the people. First box is for, so the box, the first big box, not the three, the first big box is for the Archbishop William Temple. So Fletcher studied the Archbishop William Temple. Temple's ethic was personalist and love-centred. He said the only one ultimate and invariable duty, and its formula is thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. How to do this is another question, but this is the whole of moral duty. From this, Fletcher concluded that love, regardless of context, is always good and right in every situation. Love is the only universal. So that's what goes in the first box next to the three. That's a really good quote again from William Temple. What he is saying is that you should focus on love. However, he's saying in practice, this might be easier said than done. He's not saying it's easy. He's not telling you how it's done. He's just saying that should be the focus. And so from this, Fletcher takes that regardless of context, meaning regardless of what the situation is, you should always apply love. It is always right and it is always good. It is the only universal. It's the only thing that everybody should follow. In an ideal world, he's right. If everybody showed love, the world would be a better place. In reality, that's not going to happen. So it depends whether you want an idealistic ethics or a reality ethics, a real ethics. He provides one, not necessarily the other. The three boxes to the side are for the three further inspirations, one for each. It's about keeping these things separate so you remember the different people. So Bultmann goes in the first box, Karl Barth, then Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So Bultmann argued against the idea that Jesus sought to establish some new ethical ideology. Jesus had no other ethics than love thy neighbour. What Bultmann is arguing there is, many people say, oh, Jesus had many laws and many ethics. And what Bultmann is arguing is, no, everything Jesus did was centred on the one teaching, and that is love. Karl Barth argued that God's commanding is not a rule, but applied individually to each specific example. So Karl Barth is saying you should look at things situationally again. Bonhoeffer says the will of God in any situation is based on needs of one's neighbour and the model of Jesus. So Bonhoeffer again is saying look to your neighbour and look to Jesus. All of these people inspired Fletcher into making situation ethics. So what you need to remember is agape has been around since Jesus, forever, essentially, this idea of love. Jesus focused on it, St. Paul focused on it. Joseph Fletcher is the founder of situation ethics that brings it together. I don't know the date specifically. Not sure. It's Googleable though, so just have a look up. I know that situation ethics, he started it quite early on in his life because then he lost his faith, but situation ethics he always followed it even when he was no longer a Christian. So I'd say he started to establish this quite early on.
Scott,
But it must be sometime after the Second World War at least, because obviously he takes his teachings from Bonhoeffer, and Bonhoeffer was in the Second World War. Yeah, yeah, very 60s vibe, yes, definitely. Yeah. All right. Box underneath then is for the slide on agape. We are going to have to go slightly quicker just because I do want to finish this within the lesson. So the box underneath is for agape. Agape is the Greek word meaning love. Very early on, the word was adopted by Christians to refer to Jesus' sacrificial and generous love for others. So Jesus sacrificed himself out of love of everyone, saving mankind from their sins. And so this word was adopted by Christians. It is unconditional because it's love for others. It does not have to be returned, so you don't love people to get love in return. It is selfless. It is the core of a life of faith and the key measure for goodness. And this is the key measure for goodness or badness. So it's the idea that this is the centre of your life. It is not about being a Christian. It is about showing others love. It's important to note that many people argue this theory is relativist or subjective. It's not. There is one core universal teaching, and that, of course, is love or agape. Not just love as in eros love, sexual love. It's about agape love. Particular judgments might be relative, but the absolute maxim is love. Excellent. Small box underneath then is just this fun fact, or just meaning a fun fact. You do need to write it down though. As I've just said previously, Joseph Fletcher gave up his Christian belief, but he never gave up his situation ethics. What does this show you? It shows that situation ethics is both the Christian and non-Christian approach, because agape is relevant to everyone. It depends who you take your inspiration for agape from. If you take your inspiration of agape and altruism from Jesus, then it's a Christian approach. But many people follow the idea of agape, even an Aristotelian idea of flourishing, the eudaimonia. That can be focused on this idea of agape and helping others. So it's important for you to recognise that situation ethics is not just a Christian approach. It started out for Joseph Fletcher as a Christian approach, but this later developed into something more as he got older and lost his faith.
Is there any reason why he lost his faith?
I would imagine there is a reason he lost his faith. I don't know what that is. To strengthen his argument? Yeah. Yeah. Have a look though. It might be something that's accessible online, because I think it's a really good question. Box underneath then is your 6. Of course, that's your 6 fundamental principles. Fletcher developed 6 fundamental principles that the situationist should apply. Love is the only thing intrinsically good, so it's the only thing good within itself. It is the deciding factor in Christian decisions. So when making decisions as a Christian, love is the deciding factor. Love and justice go together. It is love for your neighbour, friend or foe, so if you like them or don't. By neighbour, we don't mean the person that lives next door. We do mean anybody that you cross on the street. It is the end result. So love should be the end outcome, the consequence, and it is situational. You should always apply it to the situations. You need to know all 6 of these. You do not have to put them in the order. You do not have to number them. You need to learn all 6. In an exam, you need to mention them all. You only need to focus on one or two of them in more detail. So how I would do it is, if the question wants you to apply it to euthanasia, which is what the situation I think needs to be applied to, you might want to say how you weigh up a Christian approach. You look at the teachings of natural law, you look at the teachings of do not murder, you look at the teachings of people are made in the image of God and me, God, the spark of divinity, but the deciding factor is love. The person has locked-in syndrome like Tony Nicholson. The most loving thing to do is to let him die. Love is the deciding factor, so that's how you apply it to a specific situation. Turn your sheet over once you're ready. Alright, box at the top of the page is of course for your 4 working principles. One in each of the boxes, please. Pragmatism, relativism, positivism and personalism. Pragmatism means you're looking at practical rather than always following systems and ideologies, so this is moving away from the legalism. Pragmatism, practical. Experience, not theory. Love, not laws. Relativism, looking at every situation, applying Christian love. Positivism, love does not need to be demonstrated to know it's true and good. So you don't need to again justify it. It is just true and it is just good. Situation that depends on Christians freely choosing faith, that God is love, so giving first place to Christian love. So basically that's saying it's a leap of faith. You need to trust that God is loving you and you have to show that love to others. So even if God's love isn't always clear, you have to believe that and take a leap of faith. You have to freely choose to have that faith in God. Finally, personalism, it's person-centred, putting people first, taking responsibility for others, not just laws. A very powerful approach. A very good approach if people actually followed it. In reality, I'm not so sure. This again is must-learn territory. You need to mention these 4, even if you only focus on a couple. But you need to mention all 4 in passing. You can always join a couple together and do them a paragraph piece, or you could do a full paragraph on all 4. So you could even combine pragmatism and relativism, because you look at every practical situation. You could link positivism to the previous slide that was talking about it being the deciding factor. So you need to go home and revise these and work out which ones link together, which ones are the 6 and the 4 overlap, how would you approach them in an exam. So that's something that you're going to have to do in your revision. Box underneath is for conscience. Are we alright? Yeah. So just label the boxes if you haven't got them all down, so just make sure the boxes are labelled. Box underneath is for conscience. Conscience is very, very important for Joseph Fletcher. You might even get a specific question in the exam on conscience. It's a tiny box, it's a tiny slide. What that means is you have to still linking all the 6 and the 4. You just need to say it's your conscience that leads you to do those. It's your conscience that does the 6 and the 4 and the agape and the inspirations, etc. So don't forget, if you get a very specific question, everything is still relevant. You have to just make it relevant. No big paragraph chunks that aren't linked to the question, don't forget. Conscience for a situationist is not about a soul or a spiritual voice. It is wrong to see it as a noun, the name of something. It is a verb, it's a doing word. Conscience is an act of being ethical, not just that voice or the angel devil idea. It does not simply review and reflect upon actions done or decisions made, but on the process of making the decisions. This process of making moral decisions is informed by situation and, of course, love. Now, in the exam, you get a conscience question. To Get very, very good synoptic links. Can anybody see a link between what he's saying there about the process of making decisions and something we've covered in the conscience topic? Let me ask that question again. Joseph Fletcher there is talking about conscience being the process of making the decisions. We've come across that before from somebody else in the topic of conscience. Who and in what way? Kenzie? Aquinas is conscientia. Conscientia meaning?
The process of working out your telos or the telos from action.
Excellent. Very, very good, Kenzie. Jade, were you going to say the same? Yeah, excellent. This links to Aquinas' conscientia, the idea of conscience in action, the process of doing or using your conscience to work out your telos. If you can make a link like that in a conscience essay, it's not quite, I mean, you could use it as a supporter here, but in a conscience essay, the question is focused on Aquinas. You bring in Joseph Fletcher, fantastic synoptic link. Don't forget that's not evaluation though until you evaluate it as a this is an interesting, this is a helpful approach. But just by making the synoptic link there, you're working at a very high level. So that idea does link to Aquinas' conscientia. Very, very well done. All right, box underneath then is for William Barclay's quote. So the box underneath, the long thin one, is for William Barclay's quote. If we insist that in every situation every man must make his own decision, then first of all we must make man morally and lovingly fit to make that decision. Otherwise we need the compulsion of law to make him do it. You can paraphrase that quote. I think it's a brilliant quote. For me, it completely epitomises the problem, yet the strength of situation ethics. He's saying that if situation ethics is going to work, we have to make sure man is moral and loving first in order to apply it. And if man is not moral and loving, which essentially man is not, then you have to keep the compulsion of law. You have to still have the legalistic element of people following a law because by nature people are not lovingly fit. So he is criticising situation ethics. He is saying situation ethics will never work unless everybody is moral and loving. And until then, we have to have the law to make us do it. You're doing very well. The last two boxes is for strengths and weaknesses. That's the argument finished. So this is now the AO2 elements, the evaluation that you need to develop obviously throughout the essay, not just at the end. So, the box underneath is for the strengths. It's split into two. The first box is for this slide. So first box of the two is for this slide. The strengths, it is adaptable to specific situations when rule-based ethics are not always helpful. Do not murder. That's not always that helpful if you're in a case where it's either kill or be killed. In that situation, you're thinking, love for my neighbour, love for myself. I need to apply love, not just do not murder. Sometimes rules do not always help. It provides a guide and support in a situation rather than just rules. And you are the one that's morally responsible. All responsibility is on you. You cannot rely upon the advice of others or set laws. This actually is again very similar to Kant, because Kant says you shouldn't follow heteronymous approaches, that you should follow the law of duty. Situation ethics in the same light is saying you should not follow the laws, you should follow only your own law of love. Because then you are morally responsible and you can't blame it on, I was just following the law. move it on in just a second, summarise as best as you can. Excellent. Box next to it then is just a note about the strengths. It is a mistake to interpret Fletcher's theory as offering a solution. Fletcher does not offer a solution to making moral problems. This is a really important thing to note in your exam when you're applying it to business or when you're applying it to euthanasia or sex ethics. He did not think ethics worked that way because the modern world is so uncertain. Instead, we need to be aware of certain principles we're making moral decisions. He's not saying these are the answers. He's not saying this is what you have to do. He's saying that the world is far too uncertain, the situations are all far too different, so this is not a solution to a problem. He just hopes that the decision we'll finally make is the one that is right. Josh? Oh, so you see the box is split, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, so it's the second half of that box. Okay. Yeah. So what he's saying is, love helps you to make a decision. Love will hopefully be the support and the principle that you need, but it's not offering a solution to every single potential situation. He's just saying that love hopefully will help you. So this contrasts with most other ethical theories which posit their arguments are the answer to ethical questions. Natural law says the 5 primary precepts are the solution to ethical situations. Kant says duty or the categorical imperative is the solution. Utilitarianism says principles of utility. This is just saying hopefully this will help, but you have to deal with your situation. Excellent. Last bit, weaknesses. This bit goes in the top of the box, the two little bits underneath are for the couple of names. What actually constitutes a situation? How do you know when you're dealing with a situation? How do you know when situation ethics is appropriate for what you're going through? It's a teleological approach, hence why one of the 6 was end result. It's a teleological approach because it's always wanting an outcome of love. How can you predict what you're going to do is going to bring the most love? How can you predict that turning off someone's life support machine is going to bring the most love? For example. It doesn't provide simple answers to difficult questions, unlike a rule-based ethic. Rules give you answers. This doesn't. When love is served in a given situation, this focuses on the person or persons involved, but how far do you consider the people affected by a decision? This is the ripples in the pond argument. This is a very, very good weakness. What it's saying is, you consider yourself, you consider your neighbour, do you consider your neighbour's neighbour? How far do you consider and apply love? So, for example, euthanasia. You apply it to yourself, you apply it to the person that wants euthanasia, you apply it to your family, but then do you apply it to the doctor who has to turn off the life support machine? Do you apply it to the nurses that then have to comfort the doctor? Do you apply it to society that then might be against euthanasia? How far do you consider the love in a situation? Similarly, do you consider the future effects and look beyond the immediate situation? So do you look to the future love, or is it just the immediate outcome of love? Fletcher is selective in which biblical passages he chooses, the ones that centre on love. However, a defence of this might be that the centrality of love is at the heart of Christian message, but he still is selectively picking. He selectively picks from Jesus, he selectively picks from St. Paul, he selectively picks texts. We criticise other people for doing this, so it has to still work for Fletcher as well. We are fallible, we're flawed, we don't often consider the interests of others, we're often more concerned with our own interests. So a bit like what Berkeley said. Fletcher's ideas surrounding conscience are also vague and seem to be more about just acting conscientiously, acting nicely. His remarks about conscience are brief and leave much unanswered. I know there's a lot on that slide. Do your best. I know we are running out of time. We've still got 10 minutes though. We're all right. You did very well today. Well done, everyone. Don't forget, these weaknesses need to be integrated throughout an essay. Don't forget as well, these are purely a springboard into further evaluation. Some of you are still making the mistake of doing what I do and doing one sentence weaknesses. Don't forget, I'm talking all the way through them. I'm justifying them, I'm explaining them, I'm developing them. You have to do that with your evaluation in the exam. Because it might be clear what you're thinking, it might not be clear to an examiner what point you're trying to make. The more you extend an evaluative point, the further you go into it, the more you look at other alternatives and defence arguments, the better your grade will be. Final slide, final point. 2 boxes, 2 names, and then we are done. First is the Reverend John Macquarie. He argued that situationism is fundamentally and incurably individualistic, never a basis for social morality. Well, it is. I don't know if Joseph Fletcher really is trying to make it a social morality. He's just arguing it's individualistic. So he's kind of criticising Joseph Fletcher for what Joseph Fletcher's aim was. He aimed to make an individualistic argument. But what Macquarie is arguing is it doesn't help everybody. It doesn't help society. I'm not quite sure whether that works or not, though, because that wasn't what Fletcher was trying to argue. Fletcher was arguing if everyone did apply it, then society would be better, rather than arguing it as society should do this. D.Z. Phillips argues when one finds oneself in it's the posh one. When one finds oneself in situations where whatever one does, one is going to hurt someone. Basically, you can't help everyone. So whatever situation you find yourself in, you're always going to hurt someone. Someone is always going to be unhappy. However much you try and help people, however much you try and consider everybody's love, your neighbour of your neighbour, somebody is always going to get hurt. Very well done, everyone. I'm extremely impressed today.